I'm going to go through 10 things to get started in Premiere Pro for beginners. I'll put the heading of each item in the comments below along with the time code of where I go to it, so that way if you want to skip around you can. So a couple of tips in how I organize my files within Premiere Pro within the project panel. Keep in mind, if you leave yours to the default, this window is going to be down here on the lower left. What I like to do is I like to break my folders down into video and audio. So we did the shoot with 2 cameras. There's camera 1. In this case I named it since I was doing the video, but often I'll do something like this and I'll go camera 1 and then I'll label the other one as camera 2 so I know which one's the main and which one's the backup. Put that back to how it was. And same thing with the audio. If in this case we had the person being interviewed, we had a lapel mic on her, and as a backup we had a room mic. So I have each of those separate. And then from there you can also right click and go new bin, which is going to create your new folders. I'll have often cutaways, which might be, or this could even be B-roll, just kind of your extra stuff. And I also might have another one for audio or music if I'm going to do any background music effects or intro music, that type of stuff. This is generally how I try to organize my folders. And then usually the only thing I'll leave out not in a folder is going to be my master master sequence. And even then, if maybe I'm doing a larger project where I might have numerous sequences that I'm putting together, in that case then I might actually do a sequence and maybe do this as part 1 and then another one for part 2 and then move my sequences into that. Importing's pretty easy. You can double click on it, just grab your video files and bring those in. So I'll grab some webcam files. You can also, and then just drag and drop them wherever you need them to be. You can also go File, Import, as you can see, Control I, or you can even drag and drop. So this is that original interview. Grab some of the camera, do a Control A to grab them all, and drag them and drop them into that, and it'll drop them in that way. On my hard drive, how I will organize folders is similar in a similar way. So as you saw when we were in there you go. So as you can see, we're in the folder on my hard drive. I do have these on an external hard drive. Note that you might find that it's a bit slower when you'll get a screen similar to the one that you have showing here. Simply hit New Project on the left. And it's going to ask you to name it. I'm going to call this Test Demo, or let's just call it Test 2. And you're going to pick the location where you want it. In my case, I'm just going to throw it onto my desktop. I've got a demo folder here, and I'm going to select that. Some people might have all their Premiere Pro files within a C drive document. Some might put them on an external drive, just kind of whatever works for you. For the purpose of this, I'm just going to throw it on my desktop. Hit OK when you're ready, and that is going to take you into the default panel. Notice on the lower left here, this is going to be my project panel. You can double click on it to grab any files that you might want to import into there. From there, you can drag and drop them onto your creating a new sequence, but we'll save that for the next part. We've got creating a new sequence. There's a couple different ways that you can do this. You can, in your project panel, you can right click and you can go New Item, Sequence, Down here below it, you can go New Item, Sequence. You can go File, New Item, Sequence. Or, this is usually the way I do it, is I just take my starting file and I drag in, or my starting video clip, and I drag and drop that onto the timeline, and it'll auto set up a new sequence there. And the reason why I like to do this, a new sequence, it's going to give you a whole bunch of settings, which is fine. Let's say I choose the default ARRI one. Now what will happen when I drag and drop the video file over to the new sequence, I'm going to get this pop-up that basically says, because the frame rate, the clip settings that I used when I recorded that little intro video don't match those default ARRI settings. You can keep them or you can change them. Just hit change and it changes it to match what I just dragged and dropped onto there. Another thing that by default what it does is you'll notice it names it the same file name as what was dropped onto it. So just click into it really quick and rename it. I just find that's a whole lot easier when you're working with files. I'm going to delete the second one so as to not be confusing. That's the ARRI one. By default, when you create a new sequence, it does it that way. You can also name it in the creation process. And that's pretty much it. That's creating a new sequence. This is something you're going to have to do pretty much any time that you're in Premiere Pro. Next up is how to do some titles. There's a bunch of ways to do this, and I've actually got some numerous videos on how to do this, so feel free to check one of those out. Just real quickly, in your sequence, you can go to Essential Graphics and select one of the default ones that they have, or you can create your own. To create your own, just down here, hit Type Tool, type test, and notice how the text is really large. What I'm doing is I'm just controlling to grab it. Back in my Essential Graphics panel, I'm reducing the size. You can change the fill color. You can add a stroke or drop shadow. You can change the font, whatever. That's the basics of adding text. Notice also what it does here. I'm going to zoom in. Is it adds that to your second line here. Now you can also move around the video file if you want to put that text sequence in front of it. I'm just ripple deleting here to sync them up, or that test text. And it's showing black because when I changed it to black. So let's just change that back to white, and there you go. Now you can do all kinds of stuff on this. You can have it scroll up, scroll down, left, right, different kinds of fade-ins, etc. But that's the basics of how to add a title. If you want to get into much more detail than that, you'll need to check out one of the videos that I've got on doing the titles. Well, let's say I want to look at the original. So maybe I've shortened it, made a bunch of changes, and I still want to see that original source video. What you can do is double click on it, and it's going to give you this source window right here. You'll have to disregard all the pixelation there. This was recorded with a computer webcam with very low resolution. But you can kind of see, now that I've pulled that up, what it does here, you can see that this is where I've now shortened it to. So you see, if I want to maybe change it back and actually have it start when I'm leaning off screen for some reason, I can move the play at start point to there. And that's kind of how that works. The reason why it wouldn't let me drag, so notice what I did here, I was dragging it and it stopped. That's because down here, it was extending it to the beginning, but it can't go any further because we've got that text in the front of it. So you'd either have to move it out. You can also do that here as well, but the main thing I want to show you is that source window. Another thing is if you click on the original video file in your project panel, that's going to be in that source window as well, while still in the right panel we've got that sequence. So just try to remember you've got your source over here, which is going to be that original video file, and then your sequence, which is going to be your full edits and changes and that kind of stuff, which is what gets exported. You can do plenty of things within that source window. You can actually start adding mark in, mark out points, and a few other things as well. But we won't get into that because this is simply just a getting started thing. And the key to this particular one is knowing that difference between the source window and the program window, which has your sequence information in it. Okay, next up, transitions. Premiere Pro comes with a lot of transitions already built in. So down on the lower left, or wherever you might have it set, you've got your effects panel. You can also go up to your Windows effects if you don't see it, if it's not already showing, to add it. And then of course finally at the top here we can go to effects, which will basically be the same thing. So all of these essential graphics, Lumetri colors, all this kind of stuff, this panel here is the one that was down here when you're in this effects window. These are all the default ones in here. Let's say you want to do like an iris. You can do let's go iris around, drag and drop that onto there as well. And as you can see, it does that. Another thing that you can do with this if you want, notice when I clicked on it, once again it brought that little window up here for me to where I can move it around, but you can make changes to how it displays. So for example, default, it starts with the black there and then does that. You can reverse it just by checking the reverse here, and notice what it does now. See, so it starts big and then goes in. You can change the border width. You can change the other like video effects. These are really where you're getting into making edits to the actual video itself, not necessarily any of the transitions from one sequence to another. Okay, next up, we're going to go adding music or other audio. Often it's nice to have maybe like a little intro tune or something like that that plays when the text is showing here. So I'm going to jump back over to my project window and I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to go to wherever it is I might have that audio saves. So these are just going to be some short kind of music cuts that I've obtained over the years or the time for various different things. So let's just grab a couple of them. There we go, adds those. If you want, you can create a bin, and then in order to keep things organized, put it in there. And this is actually why I prefer to have my project panel up here, because it doesn't take long before you kind of start to run out of place. So here's a bonus tip. If you grab that particular panel, you can drag it. So notice I grabbed kind of where the text is, and I'm moving up because I want it to go up here right next to my essential graphics. And now I've got essential graphics and my project window up here, panel up here, which personally I like better. So now I want to add my music. You can just drag and drop it onto the timeline, and the lower half are going to be your audio and the upper half is going to be your video. So let's see. Creepy, and loud. So since it's so loud, click on the audio file, go to your effects panel, wherever that may be. It's usually right here in the middle. Click effects, grab your level, and just drop it down. Notice what it did here though is it did add a little marker. So if you then change it, so let's say I change it up now, see what it's doing is it's going to do different levels. So I start loud, and now what it's going to do is it's slowly going to drop, and I could drop it all the way down, is kind of how that's going. And that is a little bonus there on adjusting music. If you want it to shorten, let's say I only want it to play maybe just a little bit past that transition, simply just grab it, drag it and drop it, and I want it to be down to 0 by this point. So I'm going to add a keyframe, drag it down. Actually, I'm going to want it to go, I think I'm going to drop it down just a little bit sooner. So maybe right about there. So notice what I did is I just kind of grabbed that little keyframe up there and just drag it around. You can do also a lot of this by expanding that audio track and doing it within, you can see, you can kind of drag it, and all I'm doing is clicking on it with my mouse and moving it around. So you can do that same stuff down here as well that I'm doing in the effects window, whichever works for you. There you go. And then let's say the audio of whoever's talking kicks in at this point. That is the basics of music. Okay, next up we're going to look at color adjustments, basic color adjustments. This one is another one. There are tons of tutorials out there on doing color correction in Premiere Pro. So first thing I'm going to do is grab a better quality video. And let's grab, so this is some video footage that I shot for a music video. So we'll grab our musician here, Jasper, great musician, check him out, he's an Irish musician. And I'm going to close that sequence, and all I'm going to do is grab that file, drag and drop it onto my timeline. I've got it, as you can see, it's very kind of soft. I shot it with a soft profile, and I want to play with the color. There's a lot of ways you can do this. As usual, you can go to your effects panel and start pulling and placing various presets. The best way, in my opinion, is going to just go straight up to your color panel. And notice it still had that original video of me in the source, so I double clicked on it so that way it's showing up here. Just a visual thing. When you go to the color panel, you get your Lumetri color. Now, once again, I'm not going to go into a lot of stuff here because there's a lot to this. The first one you want to look at is going to be your basic corrections. These are just your simple color corrections. I can make it a little bit more blue. I can warm it up a little bit if I want. If you have a good neutral point, you can select your white balance tool. So I'm going to click on his jacket here, and notice what it did is it kind of warmed it up a bit more. Some of these things you need to keep in mind, of course, is what the effect and what look that you're going for. If you want to go higher contrast or lower contrast, that type of stuff. Next one is going to be your creative. Now this is where you can get into LUTs. You hear a lot of people talk about custom LUTs, LUTZ, that kind of stuff, and looks that you can put into Premiere Pro. I've got a tutorial on that as well you can look up if you want. And this will kind of change the look. So we select that one, so notice we get that kind of an effect. I'm just Control-Zing out of there. You can also preview it so that you don't need to actually scroll down and see what it looks like. Just click on the little right and left arrows, and that's going to give you a bit of a preview. Now what's nice about this is this can give you maybe a starting point that you can then play with later on. So let's say I want to go with this Domingo 145. This is I think it was a free one that I downloaded somewhere. And you can see what it looks like in comparison to the original source and now what it looks like now. You can drop the intensity of that look if it's too much. Some of them are pretty intense. And you can go back and play with your basic corrections a little bit more if you want. One more thing I want to show you is sharpening. I tend to shoot with a bit of a flat profile on my camera, so I'm almost always going to have to sharpen my videos here in Premiere Pro. Now we're going to get into much more creative stuff where you can play with shadow, highlight, tints. You can get into your curves. You can get into, this is where you're really dialing in that specific cinematic look that people are always looking for. By the way, it's not just a color correction. It's also has to do with camera. It has to do with camera lens. It has to do with lighting. But you can play around with a lot of this as well. And once again, there's tons of videos out there to watch and work on kind of getting your looks dialed in as much more as you want. But I just kind of wanted to do a quick show. You can even do a vignetting here if you want to get that kind of effect. But that's basic color. On the very beginning working in Premiere Pro, which is what this is, you're really going to kind of want to stick with this basic correction panel. I wouldn't work too much with the rest of it. If you jump back into your editing view, Notice now under my effects control, I've got that allumetric color, so you don't necessarily have to jump back and forth between the two views. You can have your allumetric color in here and make those same adjustments. You can also click on it, delete it if you want to get rid of it, and without having to go to that color panel, you can now go down to your allumetric presets and kind of drag a few if you want. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but anyway, there's these presets in here that you can use. We'll just grab the Cinespace, kind of an intense one, right? So you can now go back and now let's say it's a bit too intense, right? So I can go to Creative, grab my intensity, and maybe drop it down just a little bit because it's a little too much. That's kind of the real basic intro into color. Good color correction is a fantastic art form that I think a lot of beginning filmmakers overlook, and is really worth taking the time to learn in order to get some really good top quality videos. Getting the best quality export you can out of your video. So let's take sequence one here, which is me, and we'll shorten that. Video Jasper, so let's say for whatever reason we want that in there. Now I want to export this sequence. You can right click on the sequence and go export media. You can go file, export. You can, the reason it didn't show up there is because I wasn't clicked on it, so click on the sequence, file, export media. Don't worry about all these other ones for now. That's also another tutorial type one. Go media. Now here's the things to look for. In your format, H.264 is probably going to be the most common, most often used. Here you do have a lot of presets. So maybe you're exporting this to YouTube. You can just go down to your YouTube 1020p or 4K or Vimeo or whatever different platforms that you want to send this to. Or most often, I'm just going to leave it to the match source high bitrate. This is basically telling it to, match that source video quality. You can play with it if you want. TV standards, don't really worry about that anymore. That's kind of a dated thing. You can adjust your audio. Some platforms do have custom requirements. So I have a custom preset here, which I call my copy of Instagram. We can just grab the Instagram 3. And notice what it does is the sample rate for the audio changed, and Instagram has specific requirements for for what they want for their videos. So you need to look that up. They don't have a default one yet. I imagine at some point they will add one, but they don't now, so you'll need to create your own. After you've selected all that, which is more or less just leaving it to the defaults, hit export. As you can see, there's tons of options in here, and we could create another video that's literally just on export settings, but since this is your basic intro, that's all we want. Leave your export settings to format H.264, preset high, and that should cover you for most videos that you're exporting to begin with, or choosing like those YouTube or video options. Then it exports, and you have your final product. I'm just going to pull it up on Windows Media Player. And that's it. We don't need to watch it. You get the point. That's really kind of what I'm going after here. Or hopefully you get the point anyways. So that is very basic, very quick. 10 things to get started in Premiere Pro. Take those items and kind of build upon them. Like I mentioned the export, and there's tons of different ways that you can export a video to get different effects and looks versus the one that I did. Or when you are playing with color correction, for example, work with different effects and work with your shadows and your highlights, that kind of stuff. There's way more into any of this, but if I were to try to go into each and every one of those for this tutorial, we'd be here for like the next 3 hours, if not longer. But those key 10 items will get you started. It'll show you how to import a video, how to create a sequence, how to export it, and how to do your very basic adjustments on it. Hopefully you found that useful. I feel like I left a lot out, but I kind of needed to in order to get it all into a reasonably watchable time.